Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar on Codebeamer. We're excited to show you how this tool can improve collaboration, ensure compliance, and accelerate innovation with end-to-end traceability and integrated requirements and risk and test management. Before we get started, just a quick reminder to submit your questions anytime in the Q&A panel. If we don't get to your question during the presentation, we'll be sure to reach out with answers after. Now, I am pleased to introduce today's presenter, Applications Engineer, Jade Goldman. Take it away, Jade.
All right, hi everyone. As Ben said, my name is Jade Goldman and I am an Applications Engineer here with EAC. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about Codebeamer, which is PTC's ALM platform that, as he said, connects requirements, development, testing, and compliance all into one simple system. So starting off a little bit by addressing the negative things first, some of the common industry challenges surrounding application lifecycle management as a whole. The first challenge is really going to be just having poor and fragmented collaboration. It's unfortunately super common to have teams working in isolated silos, especially if you're primarily working off of paper-based documentation. With that, oftentimes there is also inefficient engineering processes related to broken tool integration, lack of standardization, and either minimal or no traceability between those tools. That all directly leads to non-compliance, quality, and risk issues. So if you are in an industry that requires regulatory compliance, you are fully aware that it's just not acceptable. And at the end of the day, those challenges are going to lead to long lead times, high costs, and especially if you're going back and having to do rework, or really if the tools that you are using aren't scaling with your business needs. So the solution that PTC has is, like I said, called Codebeamer. So as I mentioned, Codebeamer is an ALM, or an application lifecycle management platform for advanced product and software development. And it's an open platform that extends those ALM functionalities with the product line of configuration capabilities and provides unique configurability for complex processes as well. So this tool is going to allow your team or teams to work together, manage all of that quality information, and have the ability to connect into other workflows and make sure that you've got just one smooth process. So our solution, Codebeamer, is capable of what exactly? Number one, it has an integrated requirement risk and test management capability. So what that means is that you are going to be able to create requirements, see what risks you have against them, run test cases, do test management on those requirements, and then decompose and break all of that information down however it is that you see fit. Next, it gives you compliance process templates. So you don't have to worry about starting from scratch. There's going to be standards that already exist, and we have the templates based on different industry standards that you're able to just go in and fully take advantage of. And one extremely important piece is that it integrates with other enterprise systems. This is huge. So there's a few shown on here, but this really is such a huge part of the digital thread puzzle, and it's imperative that you're not replicating data, but that you are reusing it and that you have that end-to-end traceability. Along those lines, it is also capable of full lifecycle collaboration. So this helps to fully track lifecycle management and then again, link in the different tools and systems that you use for that end-to-end traceability. And touching on my favorite topic for a moment, change management, Codebeamer allows you to see what's actually being affected as you go through a requirement change, and even better, see what the downstream impacts could or will be. And then wrapping it all up, I'll touch on it again, back to the end-to-end traceability with, again, the idea of seeing how everything is connected so that you can easily understand the flow of your process and what's actually going from one place to another. And this slide, just a quick note before I actually start my demonstration with you. ALM and PLM have a lot of similarities, but are two very different platforms or systems. So on the right side is your PLM. So for us, that's going to be Windchill. And you can see the list of items that it would be used for. And then the left side, the ALM, so Codebeamer, what I'll be talking about today. You can see that list. And then in the middle, you can see that middle section where they kind of cross and work together. So just wanted to throw this slide in here since I think it breaks them down pretty well, and you can always come back and reference it. So moving on to what I will attempt to be a quick demonstration of what Codebeamer actually looks like. Okay, so I've got the Codebeamer homepage pulled up on my screen, and I'll use this time to just touch on a few things. Requirements management, software development, QA and testing, DevOps, risk management, and variant management. So for this demonstration, we are using a data model that is not industry specific. PTC, like I said, does require or does provide a set of out-of-the-box data models that are specific to various industries, but in this case, we're using a generic mixed development methodology. You'll see here that we have waterfall-based processes around product requirements, hardware architectures, and then when we get into the software requirements, we're moving into more of an agile methodology with user stories and tasks. Again, one of the value propositions of Codebeamer is its support for mixed development methodologies. And one of those additional values is the capability of looking at data in dashboards. So in this case, you are going to be able to see the panels with a variety of different KPIs or key process indicators for where we're at within this project from a completion perspective. So this dashboard can be completely configured to pull out the metrics and important business information from this project for you to make the appropriate business decisions. And we're also going to take a look at how this data model is actually put together. So one of the great things about Codebeamer is that it not only captures information, but you can actually also relate that information together. Here, I'm starting to see from the top level of my product requirements how those are decomposed into my hardware and software requirements. My hardware then breaks down into its architecture elements, and my software gets driven into user stories, and then we have tasks to actually implement that type of information. We can then go further in and start to layer in additional data into this relationship view. So now I can see some of the test aspects of the solution. So our hardware test cases and our software test cases, and eventually, of course, we'll get into our actual test execution and where we capture those results. So this is our configuration diagram that allows us to really just quickly see how the information is related across that data model. We can also, from this view, look at what we call the traceability browser. So this allows me a quick view into all of the data and how that data has been related as users are working on the data elements within the different trackers. So on this screen, you can see I have my high-level product requirements listed first. I can then see the relationships that have been created into our hardware and software requirements. Software and hardware requirements are then verified and validated by test cases. And then those test cases are actually being executed, and I'm getting those results of that test execution all in a single window pane. So that allows me to find information that's important to me, especially around gaps in our relationship tree. So I may see that I have certain hardware or software requirements that don't have links to test cases. Of course, we need to go back in and we need to resolve that issue. So we're going to go back and take a look at how we get some data into the system. So here we are going to start at the top left of our systems engineering V, and we'll jump into our product requirements. So this is our document view inside of Codebeamer. You can see the outline panel on the left allows me to just really quickly find information, much like it would in a Microsoft Word document. In the middle is going to be a main payload of the requirements. So in this case, both a short description and then the details of that requirement. And then on the right, we've got all the additional metadata for this particular object. So we're going to do a few things. One, we are going to import, which we can from various formats, Word and Excel being the most common. And then we can also support the RecIF process to be able to import data from other requirements tools, or I can directly generate new requirements directly within the system if I choose to. Looking at a few more capabilities within that space, one of these is going to be the workflow process. So in this case, I can see how do these requirements go from new to finished with respect to this particular data model. Here, we can see the product's requirements start out in the state of new. They go through a basic workflow, go through an approval process, and then that's how we move our objects through their lifecycle workflows. And as I'm working on these requirements and moving them through the workflow, I can also collaborate on in the information. And here we can start to add in some comments. Any users that have the authority to do so can add comments to these particular requirements. And we can collaborate on that process directly within the system. So you can see here, they start to add up in the tracked list as different users within the organization actually add their comments to the particular object. We can also do things like add additional attachments and other rich text information to further refine the particular product requirement. And as we move them through their life cycle, we want to actually start to link these requirements to other objects within the system. So for example, now that I have my product requirement, I may want to create a new related object with relationship to this particular requirement. In this case, this gives me a list of all the valid relationships that I can create within the system. So I can create a downstream decomposition from the product requirement to either a hardware or software requirement. I may want to enforce a change, right? Change process within Codename, and I can do that through an object such as a change request. I may want to do some risk analysis on the product requirement by implementing and creating an FMEA. So in this case here, you can see all these are valid relationships that I can create. So we're going to say we want to decompose this into a hardware requirement. You'll see it brings up this new hardware requirement creation window, and I can just fill in this data here, click save. Now I'll have a new related hardware requirement off of the product requirement. So you can see here in my downstream references view now how I have both the hardware and already have a software requirement linked to this particular product requirement. Same information that we saw in the traceability view a little bit earlier. Just another method for creating relationships too is the library concept. So here, I might already have data that is generated in the system, but they're not yet related. So for example, if I have to decompose this product requirement to either a hardware requirement or software requirement, but those objects already exist, then I may just want to use the library in order to go in and actually create those traces. So here I can just browse into my project, or I may be looking at other projects. Let's say a reuse library, for example, where I want to start to actually link in the data. Here we are going to do some decomposition just by dragging and dropping. In this case, a software requirement onto the product requirement. And you'll notice how that successfully creates a relationship between the product and the software requirements. So again, that's going to start to show up in our downstream reference views here. So switching over to our hardware requirements tracker, I'm going to show you a few things with respect to testing and test coverage. So here my hardware requirements, of course, are being verified by our hardware test cases. One of these views that Codebeamer provides is the test coverage browser I just clicked. So by simply clicking on that, I can see some information about where we're at from an overall coverage perspective for, in this case, our hardware requirements. So I get a complete table of all of the information that's being processed from a testing perspective. And you'll see here, now I can drive into the details so I can get some badge information as to which of my hardware requirements actually have linked test cases. If they do have linked test cases, they may show as incomplete or not covered. And what this is telling me is that I have links to those test cases from the hardware requirements, but I have not actually executed those cases, or those test cases are failing here. So you can see for this particular set of hardware requirements, I've gone through some hardware test execution, and some of those are passing, some of those are failing. Hence, the badge is denoting as incomplete. So this really gives your team leaders and test managers information just at their fingertips to define where we're at from a test coverage perspective. So we looked at test coverage. Let's talk about how to actually execute testing. So here we can jump into our hardware test case tracker, and now you can see all the different test cases that are part of this particular tracker. And not only, of course, the test cases, but the actual test steps that we need to execute for those test cases. So in this case, we're going to do a few things. We could collect a set of test cases into a test set and execute the entire test set as part of a test plan. Or just for this demonstration, we're just going to create a new test run of a single test case. How many times can I say test? And what this is going to allow me to do here is actually assign the test run to a single individual for execution and capturing the results of the information. So we're going to say here the test run has been completed. The user can actually go in and start to execute the tests. They are going to get some steps that they need to perform. And of course, we can fill in the actual results of what occurred during that test process. Again, this has that rich text input field. So if I had videos or screenshots or additional metadata, I can always add that. One of the other things we can do in Codebeamer is we can report issues. So we can report a new incident or a bug, whatever you want to call it, capture that information as a relationship to the test execution as part of the process. So in this case, now when the test has been executed, I can see all of those details around that actual test execution, and I can go in and see all the details like who did what steps were taken, and actual individual steps, as well as some pass-fail information. So that was a brief overview of test execution. Again, there are additional capabilities that I just don't have the time to dig into today, but we're going to jump back to release management. So here we have a concept around our roadmap, and the roadmap is really what's defining the project plan. So you will see that we have two different types of project plans here. We have this hardware development concept, and we also have our software development concept. So again, with that mixed development methodology, we can start to define the different subplans of, in this case, the hardware development and things like defining the hardware requirements and the architecture and things of that nature. On the software side, we might look at things like sprints and an agile methodology, where we're doing different sprint planning, sprint releases as part of that agile methodology. And in this case, regardless of what methodology we're using, we can actually go in and look at any of these release processes inside what we call the Kanban board. So Kanban board is going to show me the status of each of these objects. And again, this can be configured and allow me to really just actually start to drag and drop the tasks as part of my work stream. So again, based on the transitions that are available, it's going to allow me to actually push or put those objects in the different workflow states. And if I return back to my release view, I can see some other capabilities around looking at a Gantt chart. So you know what are the current statuses of each of these release streams, and where are we at, from a target perspective for actually getting these releases to the finish line. From there, I can go in and I can start to plan the various releases. So we can bring up the planner here, and that's going to give me a list of all of my objects that are in the release backlog. From here, I can do things like rank each of these objects, but more importantly, I can start to move the objects into the various release streams that are going to then work on those as part of the release stream. I can do that, or I can also go in and I can assign these objects to different users inside of my project. So this allows me a very quick way to start managing my releases and my sub-releases and my sprints, depending on the methodology that I'm using, and then allow users to go and actually work on those efforts as part of that process. So the next functionality or area I'm going to look at is the integrations with our source code control repositories. So Codebeamer supports a variety of out-of-the-box source code control tools. For example, Git and the various flavors of Git, Subversion, Bitbucket, and some others. In this case, we want to tie in those source code repositories into our project stream. You can see at the top here, we do have our SCM repositories tab. And here we've integrated this particular project with a GitHub repository. From this page, you can see an initial ramp of our GitHub repository where we added a bunch of files as part of the process. And in this case, now, anytime we want to make changes to those files and we want it to do a push of the files to the remote repository, we can capture from an audit perspective exactly why we did that push into the GitHub repository from a Codebeamer process item. So we can see an example here of some of the audit information. In this case, for this particular software task, we can see we actually did a Git remote repository push for this particular C++ file. And I can just go in and jump back into the GitHub and look at all of the differences for that data. So again, the integration with our source code control allows us to capture why we're making code changes, in this case, GitHub, and then into particular tasks that have been identified inside of Codebeamer. Finally, as part of the source code configuration integration, we can also look at actually kicking off build processes in some of our DevOps tools, such as Jenkins or Azure, something along those lines as part of that integration with our DevOps capability. And then now I'm going to turn to risk for just a minute. So here, one thing that we can do, depending on the industry you're in, what type of risk analysis you want to do, one of those areas is going to be FMEA analysis. So in this case, we can capture that information inside of Codebeamer, as well as look at things like the severity, occurrence, and detection and RPN calculations. And of course, we want to be able to actually link our FMEA analysis into both our requirements and our verification validation data. Again, there is a ton more information on risk capabilities with very specific other online demonstrations. So a couple other final features just to kind of round out everything I'm talking about today. So we do have capabilities to do reuse, or what we call variant management. Codebeamer provides that through what we call a working set. So within the out-of-the-box configuration, we always have what we call that default working set, which is going to be the information that we looked at prior to the video. But we can also branch that information into additional working sets, which are going to then diverge that information from the default working set to, in this case, what we've called variant A. So variant A can be a combination of the default working sets within the different trackers and different configurations. So as part of baselining our default working set, I may choose to use those baselines as the starting point for my variant A configuration, or I can take the latest and greatest data from the trackers as part of that variant concept. In this case, we can go back, let's say, to that original default working set. And if we were to go in and make a change to one of our change objects here, let's go in and say updated on main line. We will go ahead and save that. And then now if we switch back to our variant A working set, you'll notice in our product requirements, we will get a notification not only that we've switched to the variant working set, but that we've had some updates on our branched information from the default working set. So here we can actually go in and start to merge those changes between the main line to the variant, or conversely from the variant to the main line, depending on how you want to do your merge processes. So now I'll see that we consume the changes from the default working set into my variant working set, and we can do this in a mass process as well. Not going to, but that'll just touch a little bit on the variant working set concept. A lot of capabilities there as well that I just don't have time to go through on this particular webinar today. So a few last things before we wrap up. One being the review hub. So part of the concept around moving requirements and test cases and all of the data through their life cycles, as part of those life cycles, we might want to have a formal review process. In this case, the review hub gives us that capability. So the ability to send one or more objects from our trackers into our review process. Of course, we want to be able to configure exactly who needs to review those. So I can add reviewers and moderators and those type of concepts. And then those individuals will come in, and of course, they will collaborate much in the same way that we saw commenting in the trackers in the review process. But also, of course, they can go in and actually approve or reject that information. Big important piece. And again, they'll be able to see all of the information that's relevant to actually go in to make their reviews. So not only their references, the reference information, but also, of course, all the payload information for those particular objects. And if you want to, you can define a checklist of information that a user needs to do as part of their review. So once we get through the completed review, we're going to get statistical information about where we are at from a review process. So the owner of the review, I can see where we're at from a total overall review. And finally, of course, we have reporting capabilities within Codebeamer. So the ability to export data in a myriad of formats, whether it be HTML or Excel, Word, PDF, it's all available, and users can actually go in and configure those reports as they see fit and continue to pull data out of the system if necessary. So with that, I know it was a lot. Wrapped up the demonstration part of the Codebeamer webinar. So I'm going to pop back over my presentation for just a few more short slides. Okay, so as I said, that was a pretty high-level overview of Codebeamer, and as always, there's so much more to unpack and really learn. But I did mention a little bit earlier in one of my earlier slides how well it integrates with other enterprise systems, and showed just a few examples that were on the bottom of that page. But this is just a great view of even more in-depth look at what it can work with. And then honestly, what I really just want to make sure everyone saw in my quick demo there is just how valuable Codebeamer can be. So recapping what I went over, number one, you are going to have faster collaboration and knowledge sharing by standardizing how your information is being entered, where it is located, and then just really allowing the proper users to locate and view it. I promise this will be the last time I mention end-to-end traceability, but it really is a huge component. So I hope I was able to actually effectively show you how all the components are tied together and how having that easy visibility to see how objects are related, what state they're in, and what work needs to be done is such a vital piece that companies unfortunately do tend to overlook. And then last but not least, cost, right? It's got a low IT cost and a low cost of ownership. It's a decently easy tool to set up and use, so it is something that can be implemented fairly quickly. So with that, thank you so much for joining me today. Ben, back to you.
All right. Thank you, Jade, for that Codebeamer demonstration. I know I sure learned quite a bit on that. And a big thanks to all of you for joining us. We'll stick around for a bit longer in the chat for any questions that may come up. If there's anything outstanding that we haven't answered by the end, we will follow up with you shortly. Thanks again. Have a good one.